Hogwarts White Lord Chapter 131 to 145. Fire God opens the way. Moody's eyes widened in shock, and even his magical eyes seemed on the verge of popping out of its socket. In the entire wizarding world, only a select few knew about this spell, and Moody was one of them. He knew well that Fire God opens the way was a spell invented by Dumbledore himself, a man revered as a master of fire magic. This was no ordinary spell. It was Dumbledore's exclusive creation. Moody had once sought to learn Fire God opens the way to combat fiendfire during an incident in Hogsmeade. However, he quickly realized that the spell's difficulty far surpassed his expectations. The sheer amount of magical power required to cast it was enough to deter 99% of wizards, even among the most talented. But the magical power requirement wasn't the only barrier. Fire God opens the way had a unique condition. It required recognition by a phoenix. This recognition didn't mean simply possessing phoenix blood. If it were that simple, Moody wouldn't have needed Dumbledore's guidance to even attempt the spell. The so-called phoenix recognition was a form of special contract magic. It required the caster to form a deep, mystical connection with a phoenix. Only then, through immense magical control, could one wield the destructive power of Fire God opens the way. In summary, there were two critical requirements. Immense magical power. Recognition by a phoenix. Actually, there was a third requirement, one that made the spell even more exclusive. The method for learning Fire God opens the way was entirely in Dumbledore's hands. Without Dumbledore's explicit approval, no one else could gain access to the knowledge needed to cast it. Which brought Moody to two crucial questions. Who was this man? And what was his relationship to Dumbledore? Moody couldn't believe that some rogue dark wizard had managed to steal a top-tier spell like Fire God opens the way from Dumbledore. Fire God opens the way? What kind of magic is that? Unlike Moody, Dawlish and the others had never witnessed Dumbledore in action. Even Kingsley, a member of the Order of the Phoenix, had only seen Dumbledore fight a handful of times, and never using Fire God's way. Had they known the origins of the spell, Dawlish, in particular, would have reacted far more dramatically. Especially given Dawlish's current position as a loyal follower of Fudge. Fudge would have leapt at the chance to use this incident to undermine Dumbledore further. A powerful and destructive spell like Fire God's way being associated with Dumbledore would have been a political goldmine for him. Unfortunately for Fudge, Moody wasn't going to give them that information. As a staunch supporter of Dumbledore, Moody would never do something as foolish as framing or accusing him. Still, Moody couldn't remain entirely silent in the face of their curious stares. "That's a very advanced spell," Moody said gruffly. "There aren't many in the entire wizarding world who could perform it." There truly weren't many because the spell was exclusively Dumbledore's creation. But Kingsley, who had been observing Moody's reaction closely, sensed there was more to it than that. "This is magic that only an archmage can master." "An archmage? Isn't that just a myth?" Dawlish asked, confused. Kingsley gave him a withering look. "The Great Wizard has never been a myth. Headmaster Dumbledore and the former Dark Lord are both wizards who've reached that level." Hearing Voldemort's name, Dawlish instinctively flinched, shrinking into himself. But as he processed what had just been said, a terrifying realization hit him. "You mean, that person? He's on par with the Dark Lord?" The arrogance Dawlish had shown earlier evaporated instantly. The mere idea of facing someone as powerful as Voldemort made his stomach churn. Dawlish, who had initially been eager to challenge Ivan, now wanted nothing more than to crawl into a hole and disappear. "What was I thinking?" Dawlish berated himself silently, utterly mortified. "Isn't this guy too cowardly?" Dawlish could sense the subtle contempt from his more experienced colleagues, and even the newer Aurors seemed to be questioning him with their looks. I mean, how did you make such a judgment?" Dawlish stammered, trying to regain his composure. "You said that guy is very strong, I admit that. But comparing him to the Dark Lord, don't you think that's a bit of an exaggeration?" His words only deepened the disdain in the expressions of Moody and Kingsley. "Let me teach you something, kid," Moody growled, gesturing toward Ivan, who was currently dominating the mercenaries in battle. "Among wizards, differences in strength usually come down to their understanding and experience with spells. But an archmage is different," Moody continued. An archmage has transcended the boundaries of ordinary wizardry. It's not an exaggeration to say they're almost a different kind of being. Moody paused, allowing the weight of his words to sink in. A typical wizard duel was about positioning, timing, and strategy. To put it simply, it was like two people of similar physical strength in a fistfight, where the effectiveness of their punches depended on angles, positioning, and whether they could land a blow on a vital point. But in a confrontation between an archmage and an ordinary wizard, the comparison was entirely different. It's like a 3-meter-tall giant facing a group of human babies, Moody explained bluntly. Unless those children are armed with guns, magical artifacts or instant death spells like Avada Kedavra, the outcome is inevitable. The giant could crush them with a single punch or kick. Of course, there are only a handful of magic props in the world that can close the gap between ordinary wizards and archmages. The most famous in Europe is the Elder Wand in the Deathly Hallows. It is no exaggeration to say that if Snape is an elite wizard of that level, holding the Elder Wand, so he can indeed fight Ivan. As for victory, it's hard to say. The Elder Wand might be able to bridge the gap between an ordinary wizard and an archmage, but even so, Ivan had additional advantages. His magic incarnation form and the protection of the Phoenix gave him further edge. In a direct confrontation, even with the Elder Wand, it would be difficult to decisively overpower Ivan if he used all his trump cards. And then there was Avada Kedavra. The killing curse was the wizarding equivalent of a bullet, lethal upon impact. For most wizards, being struck by it meant instant death. Even Ivan, for all his power, wouldn't be able to withstand multiple rounds of the curse without dodging, evading, or defending. It wasn't a question of raw strength. The killing curse operated on a different plane altogether. It was rule magic, bypassing conventional defenses to strike directly at the essence of life itself. "Do you understand?" Moody barked, his magical eye glaring at Dawlish and the other novice Aurors. "Any spell cast by that man," he continued, "would take at least a dozen, no, 20, wizards working together just to resist. And any magic you cast at him, he can easily dismantle." Moody's tone was grim as he offered a critical lesson to Dawlish and the rest. The simplest way to identify an archmage. If you ever see a wizard standing alone and holding off dozens of opponents at once, and winning, don't think twice. Run. Immediately, he paused, scanning their faces. There's no shame in retreating from an archmage. What's truly foolish is charging forward and throwing your life away. Good analysis, a voice suddenly interrupted. A figure materialized in front of Moody and the Aurors, stepping forward casually. It was Ivan, and he was smiling. "Now, the question is," Ivan said, his tone calm but carrying an unmistakable edge, "I'm standing here. So, what's your decision? Will you come at me together, or will you turn around and leave?" Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Ivan's sudden appearance snapped Moody and the others out of their focused observation. Fortunately, Ivan did not launch an immediate attack. Had he done so, the Aurors, momentarily distracted, would likely have been caught off guard, and few would have escaped unharmed. "Who exactly are you?" Moody demanded, his magical eye narrowing as he scrutinized Ivan. Moody's attention was drawn to Ivan's current state. The man appeared to be floating effortlessly in midair, his body surrounded by a faint white mist that gave him an almost ethereal presence. He wasn't using any visible magical items or enchantments to remain airborne, nor relying on his clothing for support. This realization only deepened Moody's sense of Ivan's extraordinary magical prowess. "Is it important who I am?" Ivan replied calmly. "Sometimes, knowing too much isn't good for you." He gestured toward the hired wizards scattered across the battlefield, many unconscious, others severely injured. The message was clear, and the implicit threat hung heavily in the air. "Step back," Ivan warned. "I'm here to take back what's rightfully mine." These words caused Moody and Kingsley to exchange surprised glances. It was apparent from Ivan's restraint, both in sparing the Aurors and showing mercy to others, that he wasn't acting indiscriminately. More than that, his knowledge of them suggested familiarity. Ivan was likely someone who knew the British wizarding world well. As for whether he could be Dumbledore, he fit the profile in many ways. However, after this close encounter with Ivan, both Moody and Kingsley silently dismissed the possibility. There was something about him that didn't align with Dumbledore, something unmistakably different. Ivan was not Dumbledore. He simply didn't give off the same aura or impression. On the contrary, although Ivan had concealed much about himself, Moody had still picked up on some subtle details. For instance, Ivan didn't seem to be as old as he currently appeared. A student? Moody speculated. Is he one of Dumbledore's students? Or perhaps even a member of the Dumbledore family? The thought lingered, but Moody quickly dismissed it. He combed through his memory and couldn't recall any other Dumbledore besides Albus and Aberforth. There was no plausible reason for a new Dumbledore to suddenly emerge. What did you take from the vault? Moody asked, his tone firm but calm. That's not something you need to know, Ivan replied coldly. With a wave of his hand, Ivan signaled for them to step aside as he prepared to leave. Moody made his decision almost instantly. There was no need for the Aurors to risk a confrontation with Ivan over goblin property. After all, Ivan hadn't harmed any ordinary wizards in England or done anything that could expose the magical world. Thank goodness, Dawlish muttered under his breath, clearly relieved by Moody's stance. The other Aurors, equally tense, visibly relaxed. None of them wanted to imagine what would have happened if Ivan had unleashed another spell like Fire God's Way to clear his path. The potential losses would have been catastrophic. A wizard as powerful as Ivan was clearly a matter for legends like Dumbledore to handle, not ordinary Aurors. A wise decision. Ivan didn't bother considering whether Moody had guessed at his connection to Dumbledore. If Moody had his suspicions, so be it. Ivan's confidence was absolute. If he dared to come to Gringotts, it was because he had nothing to fear. In England, with his current strength, as long as Dumbledore wasn't his enemy, no one else could truly threaten him. As for Dumbledore, how could the old headmaster, who once championed the phrase, "for the greater good," truly be considered a gullible kind old person? To Dumbledore, Ivan represented the greater good. In his eyes, even if sacrificing the entire Ministry of Magic was required to ensure Ivan's success, it would be worth it. The old headmaster had long realized that Ivan was dissatisfied with the Statute of Secrecy and that he would likely follow the path of Dumbledore's old companion, Grindelwald. Yet, instead of stopping him, Dumbledore merely guided him. The implications were staggering. Breaking the Statute of Secrecy would undoubtedly lead to massive casualties, wizards and muggles alike. And still, Dumbledore chose to stand by. His decision surprised Ivan, not only in its wisdom but in the sheer courage it required. What are you doing? Just as Ivan reached an unspoken agreement with the Aurors, a sharp, imperious voice echoed from the distance. It was a goblin, an elderly figure dressed in a high-standard suit, his authoritative presence unmistakable. This was no ordinary goblin. British Aurors are just going to stand by and watch this? The goblin snapped, his tone laced with disdain. Fudge, you owe me an explanation. This was the head of Gringotts, the goblin who oversaw all Gringotts operations across Europe. In the wizarding world, the Minister of Magic might rule over their country, but the head of Gringotts wielded influence that transcended borders. In Europe, the Ministers of Magic managed their own territories, but the head of Gringotts was a figure even they had to treat with the utmost care. Don't worry, sir, Fudge said nervously, trying to placate the goblin. Fudge knew better than to offend someone of this stature. The Ministry of Magic depended heavily on Gringotts and the goblins to sustain its economy. Without galleons, the wizarding government would collapse. Though the goblins couldn't outright cut off the supply of galleons, they could easily use financial tools to destabilize the wizarding economy, even causing the monetary systems of multiple countries to crumble. Alistair. After hurriedly apologizing to the goblin, Fudge turned and shouted at Moody, "What are you doing? Hurry up and capture this thief." Moody was stunned. He wanted to ask Fudge a very pointed question. Who exactly is the Minister of Magic in England? Since when did an old, decrepit goblin start dictating orders to the Minister of Magic? Moody decided to completely ignore Fudge's ridiculous command. Fight Ivan. Moody knew better. If they dared to attack Ivan here, everyone present, including Fudge himself, would be no match for him. In fact, Moody was silently grateful that Ivan wasn't like Voldemort, a truly evil and malevolent figure. If Ivan had shared Voldemort's disposition, Fudge's thoughtless provocation would have resulted in their deaths a dozen times over by now. Damn it, Fudge growled, frustrated by the lack of response. He shouted again, "Did you hear me? I said capture him." This time, even Dawlish, Fudge's most loyal lackey, remained conspicuously silent. Slowly, Fudge began to realize the gravity of the situation. When he looked up again, his gaze met Ivan's. Gasp. Ivan was staring directly at him, his silver eyes glinting with a cold, piercing light. It was a gaze so frigid, so unrelenting, that Fudge felt as though he had been plunged into an ice cave. Instinctively, Fudge took a step back, his knees nearly buckling beneath him. He stumbled and almost fell. "Minister," a calm voice interrupted. Fortunately, Rufus Scrimgeour stepped forward, catching Fudge just in time to prevent him from making a spectacle of himself in front of everyone. "Please stay calm. Something's not right," Scrimgeour said quietly, his tone measured but firm. "Moody and Kingsley. They're among the most skilled of the strike team." But what was happening now? They didn't dare fight Ivan. The meaning behind this was clear and undeniable. Ivan was a powerful adversary, one the British Ministry of Magic simply couldn't afford to provoke. This was the unspoken judgment of Moody and the others. Fudge opened his mouth, as though about to say something, but ultimately held back. This wasn't the first time Gringotts had been robbed, it had happened more than once or twice before. While this incident would undoubtedly damage the Ministry of Magic's reputation, Fudge was all too aware that such blows were hardly new. As the saying went, when you've already got plenty of problems, one more doesn't make much difference. For now, it seemed the ministry could tolerate another dent in its already shaky reputation. Hi guys. The next chapter will come next year, no. You really make me sick. Ivan had no intention of waiting for Fudge to respond or release the oars to act. With a flick of his wand, a spell shot toward Fudge like a bolt of lightning. In the next moment, the hesitant Minister of Magic transformed into a green toad, croaking helplessly. "Ah!" The sudden spectacle sent shockwaves through the crowd, but none were as loud as Dolores Umbridge, who stood next to Fudge. Her high-pitched scream was reminiscent of a pig being slaughtered. Several Aurors, acting on instinct, launched attacks at Ivan, but every spell was effortlessly blocked by Ivan's defenses. "Stop! Stand down!" Moody and Kingsley immediately intervened, shouting at the Aurors to cease their attacks and avoid further escalation. "What are you doing? I want to leave. Why would I need your permission to do so?" Ivan said, his tone dripping with disdain. "It's absurd that the Minister of Magic of this country is nothing more than a politician who excels at power games but lacks any real magical strength. And you," he said, casting a glance at Umbridge, "are far too noisy." Before anyone could react, Ivan flicked his wand again. This time, Umbridge shrieked as she transformed into a pink toad, joining Fudge on the ground. Now, two toads, one green, the other pink, hopped and croaked aimlessly on the floor, much to the stunned horror of the onlookers. "Undo the curse." Kingsley ordered others as he stepped forward to cast a counter curse on the transformed pair. But despite his efforts, the spells had no effect. Fudge and Umbridge remained toads, leaping and croaking incessantly. "Don't waste your energy," Ivan said calmly. "The gap between your magic power and mine is far too great for you to lift this curse." He continued, "This is just a small punishment and a warning, but if you insist on blocking my path, I can't promise I won't consider you an enemy." With that, Ivan turned to leave. As he moved, he caught snippets of the thoughts emanating from the head of Gringotts. Before his arrival, the goblin had summoned additional hired wizards. If everything had gone according to plan, the goblins would have set up an ambush outside. 100 combat wizards? Quite the show of force, Ivan muttered with a smirk. He was unfazed. Still, there was no need to waste time in this place. The previous battle had already given him a clear sense of his current strength. Unless his opponents included an archmage on the level of Dumbledore or Voldemort, Ivan was confident he could hold his own against 100 combatants, emerging victorious time and time again. Just as Ivan was about to proceed, he paused. Scrimgeour stepped forward, blocking his path. Well, Ivan said with a hint of amusement. It seems the British Ministry of Magic isn't entirely made up of cowards. At least one person here has some courage. He glanced over his shoulder and continued, "No, make that 3. Behind him, Moody and Kingsley stood ready, wands drawn and pointed directly at him. Though they had initially refrained from engaging Ivan, the 2 veteran Aurors now had little choice but to act. "Remove the curse from them, wizard," Scrimgeour commanded, his voice firm. The moment the words left his mouth, all the Aurors present raised their wands, aiming them at Ivan. But a closer look revealed the truth. Many of them were trembling. Their magical auras flickered unevenly, betraying their fear. "Ah, it seems you didn't take my warning seriously," Ivan said calmly. He didn't appear troubled at the prospect of taking down more wizards if necessary. "The Ministry of Magic will not bow to criminals," Scrimgeour retorted firmly, his stance unyielding as he prepared to stand against Ivan. Just as described in the original book, Ivan thought, Scrimgeour despises evil and refuses to tolerate even the slightest compromise. As for Kingsley and Moody, their priorities lay elsewhere. Both veteran Aurors were focused on ensuring the safety of their men. For that reason, they would avoid direct conflict with Ivan if possible, even if it meant enduring verbal insults or humiliation. But the current situation left them no room for compromise. Ivan had openly attacked Minister of Magic Fudge and senior official Umbridge. Such an act was nothing short of a blatant provocation to the entire British Ministry of Magic. Now, Kingsley and Moody had no choice but to engage Ivan, even at the risk of their lives. Tur. Quack, quack. The 2 toads, formerly Fudge and Umbridge, had completely lost their human consciousness. They had been fully transformed into animals. "This is not a battle you can participate in," Moody ordered Dawlish. "Protect the minister." Dawlish swallowed hard, nodding quickly. Without hesitation, he led the other Aurors away, carefully carrying the 2 toads in his arms as he retreated. When Ivan had approached them, Dawlish felt an overwhelming pressure emanating from him, like the weight of a mountain pressing down. Whether as a man or as a wizard, every instinct in Dawlish's body screamed at him to stay as far away as possible from the dark wizard standing before him. This reaction wasn't unique to Dawlish. Nearly all the Aurors felt a collective sense of relief as they withdrew to a safer distance. Now, on the cliff-like platform, Ivan stood in the center, facing the 3 most capable combatants from the Ministry of Magic, Scrimgeour, Moody, and Kingsley. "Come on," Ivan said casually, twirling his sycamore wand between his fingers. "I'll even let you go first." His tone was light, almost playful, but the challenge in his words was unmistakable. "Arrogant," Scrimgeour growled, his sharp eagle-like eyes narrowing as he focused on Ivan. Without wasting a moment, Scrimgeour unleashed several spells in rapid succession, his casting speed remarkable. Even Ivan couldn't help but acknowledge it. "Impressive skill," he remarked with a faint smile. At that moment, Moody and Kingsley joined the attack, coordinating to cut off Ivan's escape routes. Their spells boxed him in, leaving him no apparent way out. "Not bad," Ivan said again, his voice tinged with amusement. With a swift motion, his wand traced a circular path in the air. Dong, 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 the sound of metal colliding echoed across the platform. The spells from all 3 combatants struck Ivan but were stopped cold by a shimmering golden barrier that materialized around him. Even their most powerful magic failed to penetrate the barrier, leaving only faint scratches on its surface. "I am possible," Scrimgeour exclaimed, voicing what both Moody and Kingsley were thinking. All 3 stared at Ivan in shock, their faces filled with disbelief. How could their combined power fail to even dent his defenses? "Can an armor charm really be this strong?" Scrimgeour muttered in disbelief. Moody, observing closely, added, "And it's been improved. He's turned the armor charm from a basic shield into something resembling full body armor." A standard armor charm could only defend against spells from a single direction, but Ivan's version was vastly superior, encasing him in a seamless protective barrier, like being wrapped in an iron tube. There were no blind spots, no gaps. Unless it was shattered through sheer brute force, there was no way to reach Ivan. "Expelliarmus." Ivan smiled faintly, not bothering to explain. With a flick of his sycamore wand, he sent a glowing red disarming charm hurtling toward Scrimgeour. Not good. Scrimgeour immediately recognized the threat and reacted swiftly. He cast his own armor charm, raising a magical barrier to block the oncoming spell. For a moment, it seemed to work. The red light of the disarming charm collided with the shield. But soon, Scrimgeour found something wrong. Bang! The disarming charm that was supposed to hit the magic shield of the armor charm suddenly turned into lightning, and after several tricky deflections at several angles, it passed Scrimgeour's armor charm and hit him hard. The spell turned. Dawlish stood frozen, unable to process how Ivan's spell had bypassed the armor charm entirely. "Don't use your rigid thinking to define my magic," Ivan replied calmly. After striking Scrimgeour, Ivan made no move to follow up on his attack. Instead, he turned his attention to Moody and Kingsley, easily fending off their spells. Kingsley's time-freezing spell was particularly intriguing, and Ivan had to devote a bit more focus to blocking it. "Magic isn't a fixed procedure," Ivan said, his tone almost conversational as he fought. "Magic is the power of the mind. As long as our will is strong and resolute enough, we don't have to be constrained by the limitations of traditional spells." He demonstrated his point with a flourish of his sycamore wand, unleashing two beams of magical light that shot from its tip. One beam hurtled toward Moody, the other toward Kingsley, both moving at incredible speed. If this weren't Gringotts, the two could have used apparition to evade. But with anti-apparition spells in effect, Kingsley was forced to dive to the side, narrowly dodging Ivan's attack. As for Moody, his wooden leg made quick movements impossible. Thinking fast, Moody cast Transfiguration, conjuring a metal wall in front of him as a makeshift shield. Crack! This power! Moody felt the force of Ivan's magic firsthand. Finally, he understood the overwhelming pressure the hired wizards had been under earlier. There was no stopping this. Ivan's spells were simply too powerful, and attempting to block them head-on was nothing short of suicidal for an ordinary wizard. The metal wall shattered under the impact, and Moody was sent flying backward. On the other side, Kingsley had just regained his footing. But before he could launch an attack, the magic beam that had initially missed him suddenly arced through the air, tracing a beautiful trajectory like a meteor, and turned back toward him. What? It was already astonishing enough that the spell had bypassed an armor charm, but what was happening now completely shattered the already fragile perceptions of those watching. The spell wasn't just bypassing obstacles, it was turning, tracking, and even adjusting its speed, slowing down, speeding up, and seemingly stopping at will. It was as if the magic had a mind of its own. The scene left the Aurors stunned and speechless. "Do you know?" Ivan said, flicking his wand and sending out several more beams of tracking magic. They weren't powerful offensive spells, just simple stunning spells. Sitting casually on a nearby stone, Ivan dusted himself off, watching as Moody and Kingsley struggled to dodge the relentless pursuit of the enchanted spells that seemed to have their own intelligence. "I was looking forward to this," Ivan said, his voice calm but tinged with disappointment. "I was hoping for a real fight against strong opponents." He sighed. "Unfortunately, you've let me down." Ivan shifted his gaze to Dawlish, who was trembling and clutching the two toads that had once been Fudge and Umbridge. "Don't worry," Ivan said with a faint smirk. "I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the two things you're holding." He gestured toward the toads. "Here's some advice. Get that kind of garbage out of the Ministry of Magic as soon as possible. Letting someone like that hold a high-ranking position is nothing short of a disgrace to Britain." As Ivan finished speaking, a sudden bang rang out. Without looking, he raised his hand, and an invisible barrier materialized, blocking an incoming spell from behind. Boom! Ivan turned his head, his expression unreadable, to find Scrimgeour standing there. "Impressive," Ivan remarked, a hint of amusement in his tone. "You're in better shape than I thought. Still able to stand, even after taking a hit from my disarming spell." "I am the director of the Auror office," Scrimgeour declared, panting heavily but standing his ground. His determination was evident. He would not yield to Ivan. "Willpower, huh?" Ivan noticed Scrimgeour's injuries. It was clear that the man was relying solely on sheer will to stay on his feet. "I don't dislike people like you," Ivan admitted with a faint smile. Raising his free hand, Ivan pressed it downward toward the ground. Suddenly, the cliff beneath their feet began to shift and transform. The rocky surface came alive, reshaping itself into a massive compass that seemed almost otherworldly. The compass encompassed everyone present. It spun rapidly, and within moments, all of them were relocated to the opposite side of Ivan. In front of the group stood the trembling Scrimgeour, with Kingsley and Moody lying nearby, utterly drained from the earlier battle. "You too as well," Ivan said, addressing Kingsley and Moody. "It's comforting to know that the British Ministry of Magic has talents like you." Ivan's tone carried an air of authority, almost as if he himself were the Minister of Magic. "What gives a dark wizard the right to pass judgment on the Ministry of Magic?" Scrimgeour retorted, his voice sharp with defiance. "Fair point," Ivan said with a shrug. "I can't argue with that." Despite Scrimgeour's bad temper, Ivan showed no signs of irritation. In truth, Ivan was surprisingly easy to talk to, especially when it came to those he considered capable. Moody, for instance, was someone Ivan respected deeply. A man who despised evil and risked his life to hunt down Death Eaters deserved admiration. Scrimgeour and Kingsley, though less experienced in comparison, shared similar qualities. They had justice in their hearts and refused to bow to evil forces. Their strength might fall short, but in terms of character, Ivan was willing to extend them respect. "But don't be so sure. Who knows, maybe one day I'll be your boss." Ivan smirked and added, "I still have a lot of time to grow, and circumstances, power, and fortunes can change dramatically over time." The meaning wasn't lost on the three Aurors. "You, Minister of Magic?" Scrimgeour said, as though Ivan had just told the most absurd joke he'd ever heard. "A dark wizard?" "Dark wizard," Ivan repeated, chuckling softly. "May I ask you a question, Mr. Rufus Scrimgeour?" "What is it?" Scrimgeour asked, his tone cautious, unsure of what Ivan was up to. "Do you know who I am?" As the words hung in the air, the three Aurors exchanged uncertain glances. The truth was, they had no idea who Ivan really was. "You don't know, do you?" Ivan said, spreading his hands with a bemused expression. "See? You don't even know who I am, so how can you confidently judge that I'm a dark wizard? You broke into Gringotts and stole—" "Stop, stop, stop," Ivan interrupted with a smile. "I'm not talking about that. I'm asking this. Who do you think I am when I'm not in my current appearance?" This time, even Scrimgeour, stubborn as he was, understood exactly what Ivan was implying. The wizard Ivan was portraying had indeed violated British law and openly challenged the Ministry of Magic. But the real question remained. Who was Ivan? They didn't even know the name of the identity he was using now, let alone his true self. In other words, Ivan continued, if I leave here today and return in a few years, or perhaps a decade later, under a different identity, a more glorious one. He smiled faintly. At that time, would it really be impossible for me to become the Minister of Magic? His words left the three Aurors momentarily speechless. Even someone as seasoned as Moody had to concede that Ivan had a point. They couldn't pierce through Ivan's disguise, which meant they had no way of knowing whether his true identity was innocent or guilty. For all they knew, Ivan could very well be a law-abiding wizard in his everyday life. And a law-abiding wizard, especially one with magical skills as profound as Ivan's, would have no difficulty making a name for himself in the Ministry of Magic. Scrimgeour was left speechless after hearing Ivan's words. "You mean to say that you're a British wizard?" Moody asked, trying to probe further. Scrimgeour and Kingsley immediately caught on to Moody's line of thinking. If Ivan claimed he could one day become the Minister of Magic in Britain, then his true identity must indeed be that of a British wizard, right? "Yes, I am indeed a British wizard," Ivan confirmed, his tone calm. Ivan was aware that Gringotts was still gathering reinforcements. He planned to deal with the last wave of hired wizards and crush any lingering hope the goblins might have of stopping him. For now, though, he didn't mind using the time to engage with Moody, Scrimgeour, and Kingsley, airing his dissatisfaction with the state of the British wizarding system. "A British wizard?" Scrimgeour echoed, clearly finding the claim difficult to believe. Seeing Moody's hesitation, Ivan smirked. "I don't know why you're so eager to associate me with Dumbledore," Ivan said, his voice laced with amusement. "But I can tell you very clearly, I am not Dumbledore." Scrimgeour looked at Moody in surprise, his brow furrowing. "You thought he was Dumbledore?" Scrimgeour asked incredulously, shaking his head. "Are you going senile, old friend?" Scrimgeour couldn't fathom how Moody could confuse Ivan with Dumbledore. To him, Ivan was Ivan, and Dumbledore was Dumbledore. How could someone like Moody make such a mistake? You know nothing, Moody snapped, unwilling to explain himself. He simply stared at Ivan, trying to determine if he was lying. One thing Moody was certain of, Ivan was not Dumbledore. If I were to become Minister of Magic in Britain, Ivan continued, the first thing I would do is improve the strength of our wizards. He gestured toward Dawlish and the other Aurors standing nearby. Look at them, Ivan said dismissively. They're not even close to my level. With this level of skill, it's no wonder England is the weakest of all the magical ministries in the world. That's impossible, Scrimgeour retorted quickly. Even if there are differences between the magical ministries of various countries, the gap isn't that significant. Oh, Ivan chuckled. So everyone is just equally weak? No wonder you're content to remain stagnant. The three Aurors fell silent. They wanted to argue that the British Ministry of Magic wasn't weak. As the leader of Europe, the British Ministry of Magic still ranked highly in many aspects of global wizarding governance. It's not easy for wizards to improve their strength, Kingsley said cautiously. It's certainly not easy, Ivan replied with a nod, casually lifting the two toads, Fudge and Umbridge, into the air with his wand. Look at them, Ivan continued. A minister of magic and a senior official, yet their magical abilities are utterly laughable. He let the toads hover in midair for a moment before adding, if promotions within the Ministry of Magic have no connection to magical competence, then why should wizards even bother studying magic at all? Gasp. The argument that different people have different roles, or that there was a department dedicated to magical research didn't hold water for Ivan. In his view, the defining difference between muggles and wizards was magic itself. To have a civilization blessed with such power only to adhere to the same mundane, bureaucratic systems as muggles was, to Ivan, utterly absurd. And it's not like they have a good brain either, Ivan added. You want to overthrow the Ministry of Magic? Scrimgeour drew in a sharp breath. The thought alone was chilling. Given Ivan's current strength, Scrimgeour realized he wasn't merely speculating. He believed Ivan might genuinely be capable of such an act. Here was a wizard who had single-handedly defeated nearly all the Aurors of the Ministry of Magic and humiliated the elite hired wizards of Gringotts. With power like this, Ivan could potentially create chaos greater than what Voldemort had wrought in his prime. No, Ivan said with a casual wave of his hand, as if dismissing Scrimgeour's concerns. Overthrowing the ministry? That's far too much trouble. Building a new system from scratch, it's not something I need to waste my time on. What do you mean? Scrimgeour asked, his confusion mirrored by Moody and Kingsley. Was Ivan implying that someone else had plans to destabilize the ministry? The man whose name you avoid saying, Ivan began, his tone turning slightly amused. You call him Voldemort, right? The moment the name left Ivan's lips, an icy chill seemed to spread through the air. For Dawlish and the other Aurors, the mention of Voldemort sent shivers down their spines. Many of them had grown up under the shadow of his terror, and now they trembled uncontrollably. Peeved. Ivan couldn't help but laugh at their reactions. Sorry, he said, feigning an apologetic tone, I know you're all terrified of him. But I have to say, while Voldemort may seem terrifying to you, to me, he's underwhelming, at best. The power of the Dark Lord is beyond anything you can imagine. One of the Aurors suddenly blurted out, his voice trembling but defiant. Ivan scratched his cheek thoughtfully before replying, weren't the Death Eaters arrested after his fall? So, what's this? A remnant sympathizer? The Auror who spoke up was a pure-blood wizard, someone whose family had likely benefited from Voldemort's rise. Ivan could see the logic. The support wasn't out of loyalty but rooted in shared interests. And now, here was Ivan, an enigmatic figure criticizing the Ministry of Magic system and openly mocking their fears. The problem lies in the foundation of the Ministry of Magic system, which stems from aristocratic rule, the very source of profit and privilege for the pure-blood elite. If the Ministry of Magic were to become a unified, incorruptible entity, how would these pure-blood families exploit its weaknesses for their gain? For Ivan to seize power, he would have to either embrace the pure-blood aristocracy's structure or face relentless obstruction from them at every turn. Shut up, Travers. Scrimgeour barked, his voice sharp with irritation. Travers belonged to one of the Sacred 28, and his family had a history of ties to the Death Eaters. It wasn't surprising. During Voldemort's reign, at least 2/3 of the pure blood families had supported him, either directly or indirectly. It's fine, Ivan interjected, signaling for Scrimgeour to calm down. After all, it's Voldemort we're talking about. He was quite powerful a decade ago. Ivan paused thoughtfully before adding, well, he's probably about as strong as I am now. The statement sent a ripple of disbelief through the group. Maybe he knows more magic than I do, Ivan admitted with a slight shrug. But in terms of raw magical power? I'd say he's not quite on my level. Ivan wasn't simply boasting, his confidence came from experience. He had encountered Voldemort's remnants and compared them to his own battles with Dumbledore. In his previous engagements, Ivan had never unleashed his full strength. At most, he'd used 30% to 40% of his magical power, and even that had been enough to overwhelm his opponents. You're too arrogant, Scrimgeour snapped, his tone laced with frustration. Like many others, Scrimgeour and his colleagues had demonized Voldemort in their minds. No matter how powerful Ivan appeared, they still regarded Voldemort as the pinnacle of magical might. While Voldemort had never ventured outside of England, this wasn't due to a lack of strength, it was because of Dumbledore's presence in the country. If the two were to clash, it would inevitably lead to chaos. Even so, Voldemort, who could go head-to-head with Dumbledore, was easily considered one of the top 5 most powerful wizards in the world. If not the second, then certainly among the strongest. Hey! Ivan let out a faint chuckle, not bothering to argue with Scrimgeour and the others. Slowly, he rose from his seat. The sight made the Aurors watching from a distance tense up, their hands gripping their wands tightly. They feared that Ivan might launch another attack over a mere disagreement. Don't be so nervous, Ivan said calmly, his voice cutting through the tension. I've already said, you're not my enemies. With a casual motion, Ivan tossed the 2 toads, Fudge and Umbridge, back to Dawlish, who caught them clumsily. Then, he raised his wand and lifted the head of Gringotts, who had been immobilized, into the air. Now, watch closely, Ivan said, his tone commanding. Magic may not grant every wish, he continued, his voice resonating with authority, but it can achieve anything that people desire. As his words hung in the air, the faint sound of railcars echoed in the distance and a large number of wizards came from all directions. Screech, this time, the hired wizards came in droves, their ranks bolstered by goblins. They filled the area, densely packed. Ivan couldn't help but suspect that Gringotts had summoned wizards from across the whole of Europe. To deal with him, the goblins had clearly gone all out. In that case, Ivan said, glancing at the head of Gringotts, you're no longer needed. With a flick of his wand, he tossed the goblin leader aside as if he were nothing. Under the stunned eyes of the British Aurors, Ivan's body transformed into a swirling white storm. Okay. Here I come. He rushed headlong into the mass of hired wizards who had surrounded him. The result of the battle was unsurprising, it was utterly one-sided. Another devastating display of overwhelming power. Moody, Scrimgeour, and the other Aurors had anticipated as much. Against an archmage, sheer numbers meant nothing. Human wave tactics were doomed to fail from the start. Well, I've had my fun today, Ivan said lightly, standing amidst the fallen mercenaries. With a graceful bow, he addressed the British Aurors. Farewell. If fate allows, perhaps we'll meet again. Crack. In the next moment, with a sharp and crisp sound, Ivan vanished before their eyes. Apparition. Scrimgeour's voice broke the stunned silence. Ivan had used apparition in a location where apparition was strictly forbidden. And he'd done it right in front of them all. A single wizard had walked through the entirety of Gringotts, starting from the door and leaving behind chaos and defeat. He's gone. Scrimgeour tried to trace Ivan's apparition, but to no avail. No matter what spell or method he attempted, Ivan's departure was beyond tracking. This wasn't the standard apparition used by most wizards, it was a more profound and intricate spatial spell. To track Ivan's unique form of apparition, one would first need to have a deep understanding of the Phoenix Force. Without that knowledge, even comprehending the spell, let alone breaking it, would be an almost insurmountable challenge. He's gone, Moody said with a heavy sigh. He knew how frustrated his two colleagues were at the moment, but the reality was clear. If they couldn't beat him, they simply couldn't beat him, no matter how much they dwelled on it. Instead of sulking here, we should focus on uncovering that man's real identity, Moody said briskly, quickly regaining his composure. Hearing this, Kingsley and Scrimgeour began to recover as well. To think that such a dangerous wizard could be hiding somewhere in England, it's unacceptable. Scrimgeour wasted no time. He began issuing orders to the Aurors, instructing Dawlish and the others to investigate Ivan covertly. Do not, he warned, under any circumstances, engage him directly. Ivan's strength was clearly on par with Voldemort or Dumbledore. If he harbored any ill will toward the Ministry, the Aurors would stand no chance. They'd be taken down in moments. I think we should notify Dumbledore immediately, Kingsley suggested. The proposal was met with unanimous agreement. At a time like this, having someone as powerful as Dumbledore in the picture was the only way to feel even remotely secure. KRR. TRR. Additionally, there was another pressing issue: Fudge and Umbridge. The two were still cursed, and nothing they had tried so far had worked. Every counter-curse, every attempt to lift the enchantment, had failed completely. Just like the cursed gold coins they had previously encountered, the curse on Fudge and Umbridge was another example of an unreasonably powerful spell. At this point, their only option was to turn to Dumbledore, hoping that the old headmaster could remove the curse. On the other side, Ivan had left Gringotts and returned to Hogwarts. He didn't apparate directly into the castle. Instead, he set his landing point just outside the Forbidden Forest. Ivan stopped in his tracks, his sharp senses picking up on something unusual in the Forbidden Forest. Though his perception told him he was alone, he knew better. Headmaster, Ivan called out, a faint smile forming on his lips. Have you been waiting for me here for a while? There was no need to guess. Ivan already knew who was there. At Hogwarts, or even in all of England, there was no one other than Dumbledore capable of matching him in magic. I'm just taking a walk, Dumbledore said as he stepped out from the shadows of the forest. The old man's demeanor was calm, showing no sign of surprise or anger at Ivan's recent escapades. It was as if he didn't care about Ivan's actions at Gringotts at all. The moonlight is lovely tonight, Dumbledore remarked with a smile. Then, with a friendly gesture, he added, would you care to join an old man, over 100 years old, for a little chat? Of course, Ivan replied, falling into step beside Dumbledore. The Forbidden Forest at night was quiet and shrouded in mystery. In the dense shadows, it felt as though countless unseen eyes were watching the two figures, one old, one young, as they walked deeper into the woods. The Forbidden Forest, a place that most considered terrifying, seemed more like a private garden for Ivan and Dumbledore as they strolled through it with ease. Monsters lurking in the forest and dangerous magical plants withdrew into the shadows, observing the two from a safe distance. Even from afar, they instinctively recoiled, retreating further into the darkness. The creature's primal instincts screamed a warning. The two human wizards walking before them were more terrifying than dragons, more dangerous than any magical creature in the forest. Gringotts? After about 5 minutes of walking in silence, Dumbledore broke the quiet with a simple question. Yeah. Ivan replied without hesitation, as if he had been expecting it. I went there to retrieve some things. He smiled faintly and added, but you know, I'm not one to steal from others. I only took what rightfully belongs to me. Ah, that sounds very much like you, Dumbledore said, nodding approvingly. It was clear he wasn't particularly concerned with whether Ivan had actually stolen anything from Gringotts. But, truthfully, Dumbledore was glad Ivan hadn't resorted to theft. It wasn't about morality, about being good or bad. For Dumbledore, it was about the principle: stealing was cheap. For a wizard as naturally gifted as Ivan, stooping to theft was unbefitting. It lacked dignity. The fact that Ivan had openly broken into Gringotts and acted without subterfuge reassured Dumbledore. It wasn't the method of a thief, it was the bold and confident action of someone who believed in their own power. After all, Ivan was his disciple, and his openness and willingness to act without deceit were qualities Dumbledore found commendable. Don't you blame me? Ivan asked, curious about Dumbledore's reaction. Huh? I don't see why I should, Dumbledore replied with a shrug. Didn't you say you were taking back what rightfully belongs to you? If it was about reclaiming what was already his, Dumbledore reasoned, it couldn't truly be considered stealing or robbery. It was simply recovering items from the goblins. Those cursed gold coins are very dangerous. I wonder what we should do with them, Dumbledore remarked, his tone more serious. I know, Ivan said with a nod. That's why I have no intention of keeping them. I plan to destroy them immediately. This admission took Dumbledore by surprise. Oh? The old headmaster quickly deduced that Ivan was referring to the soul coffin and the cursed gold coins it contained. As for why Ivan claimed those items as his, it wasn't difficult to infer. For an ancient family like the Ambrosius, it would be entirely plausible for such artifacts to be part of their heritage. This is my mission, Ivan added. Dumbledore, however, misunderstood Ivan's words. He assumed that Ivan was referring to a deeper, perhaps familial duty connected to his lineage. What Ivan meant, however, was something entirely different. The system task itself is naturally a kind of mission. If Ivan wants to complete the task, then destroying the soul coffin is inevitable. Walala. Ivan pulled the soul coffin out of the traceless extension bag. Both he and Dumbledore had already spent time studying the magic surrounding it and had determined how to completely destroy it. However, before that could happen, Ivan still needed to thoroughly study the curse it contained. The main quest for Ivan's first year at Hogwarts had two requirements. First, he needed to completely analyze the spells on the soul coffin and the cursed gold coins to understand their essence. Second, he had to destroy both the soul coffin and the gold coins, ensuring the curse they carried would vanish entirely from the world. Of the two, the latter was relatively straightforward. The real challenge lay in analyzing the intricacies of the soul coffin itself. Do you need my help? Dumbledore stood off to the side, watching Ivan carefully observe the soul coffin with his wand, turning it and inspecting it from every angle. The two of them had already determined the nature of the gold coin's curse. It was a form of ritual magic, deeply tied to a powerful contract. Once activated, the curse would latch onto the victim's soul like a parasite, impossible to remove or escape from easily. Ivan's movements were deliberate and meticulous. He had no intention of becoming a victim of the soul coffin's curse while attempting to complete his task. The irony of being cursed by something introduced by his own system would have been far too ridiculous for him to tolerate. Leave it to me, headmaster, Ivan said, declining Dumbledore's offer of assistance. The old headmaster had already done enough. After all, he had turned a blind eye to Ivan's intrusion into Gringotts and his clashes with the Aurors. The old man watched carefully, curious to see how Ivan would handle the sarcophagus. Ivan had said he intended to destroy it, but as far as Dumbledore knew, there weren't many spells capable of destroying such a deeply cursed object. The simplest and most effective option was Fiendfire. Dumbledore wondered if Ivan could master the true Fiendfire. With Dumbledore by his side, there would be no risk of the fire spiraling out of control. More importantly, the experience would give Ivan a first-hand understanding of the destructive nature of black magic, serving as a stark reminder to use such power with caution. Just as I thought, Ivan murmured, closing his magic eyes and shutting down his spiritual vision. When I was studying the cursed gold coins earlier, I realized something. The source of the curse isn't the gold coins themselves. It's this sarcophagus. The sarcophagus was the origin of the curse, while the gold coins acted as tools to spread it. The relationship between the two is like that of the man-eating plant and the sweet nectar. The gold coins can seduce human greed, and the final harvest is actually the sarcophagus, the carrier. In other words, the number and type of gold coins have no effect on the curse itself. Even if all the gold coins inside are destroyed, the soul coffin will also take back the lost curse magic and redistribute it to the remaining gold coins. And if one day, all the gold coins will be broken, that doesn't matter. As long as you continue to throw gold coins into the soul coffin, the curse it contains can still create more and more powerful cursed gold coins. To some extent, the soul coffin was a terrifying magical artifact. No wonder the system asked me to study this thing, Ivan thought, frowning slightly. The curse magic on the soul coffin doesn't just follow a simple magical cycle, it replenishes itself. The magic of Death, Dumbledore said quietly, voicing the answer before Ivan could speak. You've figured it out, then? Ivan asked, unsurprised. Dumbledore had always been deeply perceptive. It wasn't surprising that he would recognize death magic when it was so present. I once searched for the legend of the Deathly Hallows with a friend, Dumbledore said, his gaze distant. Gellert Grindelwald? Ivan asked knowingly. At the mention of that name, Dumbledore's expression froze for just a moment before softening into a small smile. Yes, Dumbledore replied. You know, we were once very close. He hesitated, then added quietly, we even said it together, for the greater good. The last time Ivan and Dumbledore had spoken about Grindelwald, Ivan had found himself admiring the man's ideals, even if his methods had been flawed. Is Harry's invisibility cloak one of the Deathly Hallows? Ivan asked. After returning from Christmas, Ivan had seen Harry's cloak and asked to study it for a while. While examining it, he'd sensed faint traces of death magic woven into its core. Was it originally in your hands? Ivan pressed further. Dumbledore nodded slightly. After James and Lily died, the key to the Potter family vault was entrusted to me. Dumbledore had obtained the invisibility cloak 10 years ago and had studied it for a long time. The old man did not hide this fact. As a wizard, curiosity about the power of death was entirely natural. So, did you find anything? Ivan asked. I did, Dumbledore replied. We all know that there is magic in nature. The magic of nature is the source of power for magical transformations. Only when wizards truly understand the laws of magic in nature can they deduce potion formulas, balance their bodies, and harmonize with the magic that exists naturally in the world. However, the natural magic that Ivan and Dumbledore referred to was not the same as the elemental forces, earth, water, wind, fire, that ordinary people imagined. The two concepts were fundamentally different. The former refers to the material composition of nature, the tangible elements of the world. In contrast, true natural magic is tied to intangible and conceptual forces. For example, the magic of death, the magic of the starry sky. The magic of time, the magic of the mind, the magic of fate. These forces exist beyond the material realm and carry a much deeper significance. The death magic was used in the creation of the soul coffin, Ivan observed thoughtfully. It can operate endlessly, but it's different from the magical cycle of Hogwarts Castle, he added. This artifact passively absorbs death magic from the world around it to replenish its own power. Dumbledore nodded as Ivan's explanation continued. The magic that sustains Hogwarts Castle works differently. The source of its power is the young wizards who study within its walls. Every young wizard who enters Hogwarts signs a magical contract with the castle. And as they live and study here, they provide enough magic to keep the castle running. In essence, as long as students are enrolled at Hogwarts, the castle's magic will remain endless and inexhaustible. So, are you having any ideas I should be worried about? It's too early for me to wield the magic of death, Ivan remarked calmly. He wasn't tempted by the immense power associated with death magic. Instead of lingering, Ivan took decisive action. He raised his wand and cast a spell on the cursed gold coins in the soul coffin. The powerful spell, fueled by positive emotions, clashed against the dark magic residing within the soul coffin. The opposing forces, positive and negative, began to collide violently, disrupting the intricate magical balance inside the artifact. Crack! A sharp, splintering sound echoed as the soul coffin began to break apart. Before long, it crumbled bit by bit, turning to ashes and vanishing into the air right before their eyes. You did it, Dumbledore said softly, his voice tinged with admiration. Yeah, Ivan replied simply, as if it were nothing extraordinary. And with this, my task should be over. Ivan wasn't surprised. And as the first-year trial task was completed, the pleasant system prompt sound also rang in Ivan's ears. There was no need to use a fiendfire curse. The simplest way to destroy a cursed object was to counter it with opposing magical power. Of course, for most wizards, such a method would sound like a fairy tale. While most wizards were still stuck chanting spells and relying on wand movements, Ivan had already begun to grasp the essence of magic itself. This level of understanding was far beyond the imagination of ordinary wizards. Congratulations to the host for completing the main task. Current progress. Recover the soul coffin. Completed. Trace the source of the curse. Completed. Task reward. Experience points x1. Here it comes. Ivan's eyes flickered as he read the system notification. For someone who usually maintained a calm demeanor, the news stirred an unmistakable excitement within him. Experience points. These were far more valuable than potential points. While potential points could enhance certain abilities, experience points were the rare currency needed to push an attribute beyond the threshold of 5, into the domain of exceptional mastery. Ivan began to consider carefully where he should allocate this 1 point of experience. Attributes. 1 ordinary, 2 excellent, 3 outstanding, 4 rare, 5 legendary, 6 apocalypse, 7 miracle. Soul. 5 legendary, magic. 5 legendary, physique. 2 excellent. Thinking. 3 outstanding, mind. 3 outstanding, will. 3 outstanding. Potential points. 0 experience points. 1. At this moment, only 2 attributes stood out as viable options for investment: soul and magic. Although experience points could technically be converted into potential points, only a fool would waste them that way. Between the 2 key attributes, soul and magic, Ivan already knew which one to enhance first. Magic. Ivan decided resolutely. He had already gained a good understanding of the soul attribute. To Ivan, abilities like clairvoyance, the magic eye, and the dream dimension all boiled down to one core function: observation. In simple terms, the higher the soul attribute, the clearer and deeper one's perception of the world became. But when it came to magic, things were different. With just 5 points in the magic attribute, Ivan had already achieved the status of a natural archmage. It was almost impossible to imagine what kind of power or experience he might gain by pushing the attribute to 6. Professor, Ivan asked, turning to Dumbledore, do you know what lies beyond the realm of an archmage? Beyond the archmage? Dumbledore repeated, intrigued by the question. He didn't warn Ivan against being too ambitious or accuse him of arrogance. Instead, he looked at the young wizard with interest, curious about the reason behind his inquiry. As a wizard, isn't it natural to want to push further down the path of magic? Ivan explained. Dumbledore nodded in agreement. Indeed, he said, there's no fault in that reasoning. Although, Dumbledore added with a small smile, it may be a little early for you, it is always good to be mentally prepared. Dumbledore then continued, as we've discussed before, the difference between an archmage and an ordinary wizard lies in the qualitative transformation of magic power. It is this transformation that marks the true threshold into the realm of mastery. The magical power of an archmage is significantly stronger than that of ordinary wizards. When spells collide, the archmage's magic will overwhelm and crush the magic of ordinary wizards with sheer force. Take the battle between Harry and Voldemort in the original story as an example. Harry, a mere student, manages to face off against an archmage like Voldemort. In theory, such an occurrence should be impossible. Yet, despite Voldemort's immense power, he is unable to kill Harry Potter. There are numerous explanations for this. The prophecy that binds their fates. Lily Potter's sacrificial love. Voldemort's integration of Harry's blood into his own body. The resonance of their phoenix feather wands. Voldemort's hesitation due to the shared connection with Harry. The reasons are many, but the conclusion is simple. Voldemort, despite his reputation, wasn't strong enough to overturn fate. Against anyone other than Harry and Dumbledore, Voldemort is utterly dominant. His power allows him to crush all opposition with ease, leaving no room for a stalemate, confrontation, or even a prolonged back-and-forth battle. If you wish to ascend to the level of a great wizard, Dumbledore explained, there are 2 primary paths: magic transformation and blood reversion. Either path, if pursued to its end, offers the potential to glimpse the realm beyond the great wizard. This implies that a 6th point of magical power exists in this world. While reaching it is extraordinarily difficult, so challenging, in fact, that even Dumbledore and Grindelwald considered it to be nothing more than a myth, it remains theoretically possible. I once held 2 of the Deathly Hallows, Dumbledore admitted. Through studying them, I caught a glimpse of what lies beyond our current understanding of magic. The Deathly Hallows are said to embody the magic of death. According to European legend, anyone who collects all 3 hallows will become the master of death. However, the god of death, referred to in the legend, likely isn't a literal deity. Ivan believed that death, in this context, symbolized the magic of death, a fundamental and mysterious force. To become the master of death essentially means to become the master of death magic itself. Do you mean to fully merge with a specific natural magic? Ivan asked, thoughtfully. Yes, Dumbledore replied, nodding. If the initial stage of magic transformation is to integrate a fragment of natural magic into one's body, then the culmination of this path is to fully master one of the 12 natural magics. The 12 natural magics represent the fundamental forces of nature as defined within the wizarding world. Unfortunately, the times have changed, and it has been centuries since any British wizard has surpassed the level of a Grand Master. As for blood reversion, Dumbledore continued, it's a much simpler path compared to magic transformation. The concept of blood reversion relies on the latent power of one's ancestors within their bloodline. It is akin to standing on the shoulders of giants and taking a step further. However, the prerequisite for pursuing this path is having an ancestor who truly reached the realm of 6 points of magical power. For those without such lineage, ordinary wizards, for example, the path of blood reversion is entirely out of reach. Ivan, Dumbledore said with a knowing smile, you carry the blood of Merlin and the Phoenix family. You may dismiss the pureblood ideology as outdated, a relic of a time when they clung to grandiose dreams. But there is a kernel of truth in their beliefs. The purer the blood, the stronger the magical potential that can be inherited. This often translates to a higher ceiling for magical accomplishments in future generations. The problem with purebloods, Dumbledore added thoughtfully, is not their blood. The real issue lies in their decadence. Each generation of purebloods has been consumed by a life of indulgence and idleness, squandering their potential and stagnating in their complacency. However, tracing back to their origins, countless powerful wizards have emerged from the bloodlines of today's pureblood families. Given Ivan's lineage, it seemed inevitable that he could reach 6 points of magical power. With the 2 ancient bloodlines he carried, Merlin's and the Phoenix families, each one alone held the potential to elevate him to unimaginable heights. If Ivan could fully develop even one of these bloodlines, he might awaken powers that could lead him down a path that even Dumbledore had never witnessed in his lifetime. You were fortunate, Dumbledore said, though there was no trace of envy in his tone. After all, Dumbledore himself was a member of the Phoenix family, sharing part of that same legacy. Moreover, Dumbledore had already found his own path. He understood what it would take to reach the elusive realm of Magic 6 and was content to follow his chosen course. Professor, Ivan asked, breaking the reflective silence, what is it that you seek? A great adventure. Ivan's thoughts drifted to something Dumbledore had once said, a hint at the opportunity the old headmaster had been searching for, one that might allow him to break through to Magic 6. Death is another great adventure. At the end of the original story, Harry encountered Dumbledore at King's Cross Station in a liminal space between life and death. Ivan suspected that, by that point, Dumbledore might have already transcended the boundaries of mortality, potentially breaking through to the realm of Magic 6, a state beyond life and death. Similarly, Grindelwald's willingness to face death after Dumbledore's passing raised questions. Ivan couldn't shake the feeling that the deaths of these 2 figures were not random but deliberate, part of a premeditated plan. How did you feel about your adventure at Gringotts? Dumbledore asked, steering the conversation in a new direction. From Snape to Voldemort, mercenaries, and Aurors, Dumbledore had intentionally been shaping Ivan's journey. By now, Ivan's combat experience rivaled that of seasoned veteran wizards. How should I put it? Ivan said, shrugging, a little disappointing. That's the state of wizards today, Dumbledore replied with a resigned sigh. The war against Voldemort had disrupted England's magical traditions, cutting off many lines of knowledge and training. Countless powerful wizards perished in the conflict, leaving a void in magical expertise and resilience. Dumbledore's decision not to chastise Ivan was deliberate. He had already observed one important thing. Ivan had not killed anyone during his confrontation with the mercenaries and Aurors. As long as Ivan refrained from taking lives, Dumbledore could accept and even understand the methods he employed. Dumbledore's reasoning wasn't about being a saint, it was a pragmatic understanding of the limited number of wizards in the world. Each wizard represented a valuable resource. Ivan also agreed with Dumbledore's perspective. If he chose to kill, it would mean severing the restraints that guided his actions, leaving him unbound in the future. While killing one or two wizards might not seem significant, taking the lives of hundreds or thousands would deal a catastrophic blow to the entire wizarding world. Ivan's ability to act with discretion gave Dumbledore a sense of relief. In contrast, Grindelwald had discarded all restrictions on killing, and Voldemort viewed human lives as utterly disposable. In the Muggle world, killing was often seen as inevitable or commonplace due to the sheer size of their population. But wizards were different. There were only hundreds of thousands of wizards globally, a mere 1/10,000th of the Muggle population. By this calculation, every wizard Ivan killed would be equivalent to eliminating 10,000 Muggles. Killing just 1,000 wizards would parallel wiping out 10 million people in the Muggle world. The sheer scale of such destruction was staggering. Imagine if someone were to take responsibility for tens of millions of deaths, it would be an unthinkable atrocity. Not just in the history of humanity, but even looking toward the future, it seemed unlikely anyone could, or should, ever achieve such a level of destruction. And this didn't even account for indirect deaths. The ripple effects of a conflict among wizards would escalate quickly. Once war broke out, tens of thousands of wizards could die. If that impact were magnified 10,000-fold in the Muggle population, the devastation would be unimaginable. The entire World War II resulted in over 100 million casualties, but not even 200 million. When considering Ivan's potential, Dumbledore understood that Ivan's magic would inevitably grow to a level that even he would have to look up to. At that point, there would be no external force capable of restraining him. The only thing that could guide Ivan would be his own conscience. "What do you think of my work?" Ivan asked. "Very good," Dumbledore replied with a smile, though the punishment for Fudge and Umbridge was a bit heavy. "At least I didn't actually hurt them," Ivan said defensively. "Ah, yes," Dumbledore nodded in agreement. He didn't seem particularly concerned about the humiliation of the Minister of Magic. The truth was, Dumbledore had never placed much stock in Fudge. With so few wizards in England, his choices for leadership were limited. Fudge had simply been the tallest among the short options available. But now things were different. The arrival of Ivan had given Dumbledore a glimmer of hope for the resurgence of the British wizarding world. Put bluntly, Ivan's presence guaranteed at least a century of prosperity for the magical community. That alone was something Fudge could never offer, nor could anyone of his ilk even compare. "They were too noisy," Ivan remarked, his tone frank. He didn't bother to play the role of a saint in front of Dumbledore. "I don't quite understand why they act so arrogantly." Ivan's actions were always guided by his own will. While he might occasionally be influenced by others' emotions, his overall direction remained firmly his own. "Is it because he's the Minister of Magic that he feels untouchable?" Ivan questioned, a hint of irritation in his voice. "This is the nature of power," Dumbledore replied, seizing the moment to impart a lesson. "When someone is corrupted by power, arrogance inevitably follows." "Magic is power," Ivan retorted. Dumbledore smiled knowingly. "True, but the status of wizards was never meant to be achieved solely through power." Many believed Dumbledore to be a saint, a paragon of virtue. But only he truly understood that this image was far from the truth. He wasn't above power or strength, he feared it. Dumbledore feared that, with the wrong choices, he might become an even greater threat than Grindelwald or Voldemort. His restraint wasn't an act of saintliness but a conscious effort to avoid becoming a monster. "That said, power can also achieve great things," Dumbledore added, his tone encouraging. "I hope you learn to use your power wisely, Ivan. After all, Gryffindor never feared power, they embraced it. The four houses of Hogwarts represent different kinds of people. Gryffindor stands for bravery, sometimes recklessness. They are bold enough to risk their lives for what they believe in, even when facing overwhelming odds." If Ivan thought he could win Gryffindors over with sheer strength alone, he was mistaken. Unless he were willing to eliminate every single one of them, Gryffindors would never be conquered by power alone. They would only follow someone who earned their respect. Don't worry. I understand people, Ivan said with a nod, his tone composed. Elegance was what he pursued, and for him, true elegance meant not waving a wand around like a fool. Language, negotiation, emotions, there were countless ways to communicate and influence others without resorting to brute force. Similarly, to win over people with diverse personalities, one had to adapt their methods accordingly. It's good that you recognize this, Dumbledore said, his satisfaction evident. After a pause, he added, if you encounter any trouble in the future, feel free to come to me. Ivan blinked, genuinely surprised by Dumbledore's words. The message was clear. Dumbledore was removing the restraints on Ivan, giving him the freedom to act as he wished. More than that, Dumbledore was offering himself as a safety net. He was willing to stand behind Ivan and help him resolve any challenges he might face in the future. For instance, during the incident at Gringotts, Ivan had used Path of the Fire God and his magic incarnation form in front of countless witnesses. While many high-ranking officials in the Ministry of Magic were complacent and ineffectual, there were exceptions, people like Scrimgeour and Moody. With their skills, it was only a matter of time before they began piecing together the truth about Ivan. But, why does it feel like you always know everything? Ivan asked, frowning slightly. It was unsettling how much Dumbledore seemed to know, as though he had been present during the Battle of Gringotts himself. There are many ways, Dumbledore replied cryptically, a knowing smile on his face. You have to let an old man keep some of his little secrets, don't you? You were there, weren't you? Ivan pressed, his tone laced with suspicion. Who knows, Dumbledore responded with a chuckle, maybe. Ivan was not entirely satisfied with the vague answer, but he chose not to pursue it further. As long as he was confident that Dumbledore bore no ill will toward him and was, in fact, supportive, the specifics didn't matter much. What about the Ministry of Magic's follow-up? Ivan asked, shifting the conversation. Leave that to me, Dumbledore reassured him. After a brief pause, he added with a smirk, didn't you say they can't prove that it was you? Ivan couldn't help but laugh softly at Dumbledore's casual confidence. It was a reminder that even in matters of great complexity, Dumbledore's wit and influence were not to be underestimated. Ivan didn't expect Dumbledore to really accept his sophistry. Thinking of this, Ivan looked at Dumbledore with a strange look. I didn't expect you to be such a headmaster, ha ha ha. Dumbledore turned around with a smile. The old headmaster's protection of his shortcomings on the Gringotts issue made Ivan's impression of him change greatly. Dumbledore is also a person, an elder. He really knows how to distinguish between the close and the distant. Ivan is one of his own, and Dumbledore is very tolerant of what he does. Even if Ivan commits a crime, as long as it does not involve principled issues, Dumbledore will not say anything. Ivan even suspects that even if he really degenerates and becomes the second Voldemort, Dumbledore will persuade him to get back on track instead of giving up and killing him. Perhaps in the eyes of the old man, Ivan is still young. He took the wrong path, which is just an inevitable experience in the process of growing up. As an elder, it is Dumbledore's responsibility to correct Ivan's mistakes. His life, his power, even if it is at the cost, if it can be exchanged for Ivan's situation, it is worth it. Ivan said goodbye to Dumbledore, and then returned to the Gryffindor dormitory impatiently. Holding an experience point in his hand, Ivan's mind is now full of what changes will be obtained after adding it to the soul or magic. Ivan? As soon as he returned to the dormitory, Ivan did not see Hermione and others. Neville stayed here. When he saw Ivan, he was a little curious about where he had gone. But Neville did not ask, merely looking at Ivan in surprise as he hurriedly opened the secret world closet and stepped inside. What's going on? Neville had never seen Ivan so excited before. Ivan's back? As Neville stood puzzled, Hermione and Parvati entered the dormitory. The two asked about Ivan, and upon learning that he had gone into the secret world, they decided to wait for him in his dormitory. Meanwhile, Ivan was walking through the secret world. He made his way directly to Guardian Town and adjusted the permissions of the magic barrier, temporarily preventing anyone from entering. It wasn't that Ivan didn't trust Hermione and the others, it was more that he couldn't guarantee what might happen when his magic attribute advanced to 6 points. After all, the leap to 5 points had resulted in the birth of a powerful Obscurus. And there was no need to elaborate on just how destructive Obscurus could be. Ivan didn't want to risk accidentally harming Hermione or anyone else because of his magical breakthrough. For safety's sake, it was better for him to handle this alone. System, he said aloud. Opening the attribute list, Ivan didn't hesitate for a moment and decisively allocated the experience point to the magic attribute. Attribute increase successful. Magic. 5 right pointing arrow 6. The instant his magic attribute rose from 5 to 6, Ivan felt an unparalleled sense of comfort course through him. This feeling was difficult to describe. It was like a person carrying countless heavy loads suddenly setting down the burdens from their shoulders. What's going on? Ivan couldn't immediately discern the root of the changes he was experiencing. He carefully focused his senses and finally pinpointed the reason for his newfound lightness. It's not that my burden has lessened, it's that my strength has increased. No, it wasn't just strength, it was magic power. Ivan's magic power had undergone a tremendous improvement. The extent of this enhancement was extraordinary. If described with numbers, Ivan's magic power at level 5 allowed him to lift a weight of approximately 50 without the aid of a wand. However, after breaking through to magic power 6, his upper limit had surged to 80. This 30-point difference might not seem significant at first glance, but it represented a qualitative leap rather than a simple numerical increase. It was akin to the difference between fine steel and ordinary iron, or between iron tools and bronze tools. For example, the hardness of copper is less than 3, iron ranges from 4 to 5, while steel can exceed a hardness of 7. Although these differences in numbers seem minor, just 1 or 2 points, the results were vastly different in practice. When comparing weapons made of bronze, iron, and steel, the steel sword could easily slice through its weaker counterparts. Ivan's magic power was no different. Breaking through to magic power 6 granted him capabilities that were unimaginable at level 5. The changes were not merely incremental, they were transformative. Ivan felt something strange, some very special fluctuations that seemed to emanate from the darkness. These fluctuations were omnipresent. They felt like invisible threads, weaving through every corner of the world Ivan could perceive. What are these? Ivan activated his spiritual vision and magic eyes, hoping to uncover the mystery of these threads, but even with both, he couldn't see them. I can sense them. They're definitely there, but I can't see them. It became clear to Ivan that his current soul attribute was insufficient. Perhaps only by advancing his soul attribute to 6 could he observe this new layer of reality more clearly. What can these threads do? Curious, Ivan focused on a single thin thread nearby and carefully interacted with it. Boom! The moment Ivan touched the thread, he felt an overwhelming sensation ripple through his entire being. The previously serene earth beneath him began to tremble violently. Before Ivan could fully grasp what was happening, an earth-shaking explosion roared from a distance. Startled, Ivan entered his magic incarnation state, his body transforming into a swirl of white energy as he soared into the sky to investigate. Holy fucking shit of Merlin! Hovering high in the air, Ivan looked on in shock at the scene before him, momentarily frozen. Several dozen kilometers away from the wardrobe's exit, a mountain hundreds of meters tall had completely collapsed. For a moment, the ground trembled, boulders tumbled, and trees were uprooted. Countless birds and beasts fled in terror, their instincts screaming of an impending disaster. Did I do that? Ivan stared at his hands in disbelief. He could feel the residual magical energy radiating from the shattered mountain in the distance. It was unmistakably his magic, the lingering traces of the spell he had just inadvertently triggered. How did I manage that? I didn't chant a spell, and I didn't even think of casting anything. The earth cracked, rocks collapsed, and the destruction wrought by this single act was astronomical, easily 100, perhaps 1,000 times more devastating than the strongest blasting spell Ivan had ever cast. The earth shuddered, mountains were destroyed, and it resembled nothing short of a natural disaster. And yet, all of this was the result of Ivan casually lifting a finger and delicately interacting with a single thread. What are these threads? Are they some kind of law? Ivan's mind raced with theories, and he began to suspect that he had brushed against the essence of these threads, something tied to the breakthroughs achieved at Magic 6. Should I try again? Determined to understand, Ivan raised his hand once more. This time, He carefully examined the threads around him. He realized something remarkable. The thread's existence seemed entirely unrelated to physical proximity in the material world. A thread that appeared to be very close to Ivan could represent a lake or mountain range thousands of miles away. The strings of the world. This was Ivan's term for the newly discovered phenomena he could now manipulate after breaking through to Magic 6. Although his current soul attribute was insufficient to fully perceive these strings in their true form, Ivan was certain of their existence. Is this the essence of magic? Ivan lowered his wand, reflecting on the deeper mechanics of the magical system he had uncovered. If magic is like a piece of music, then plucking the strings of the world is akin to casting a spell. Each spell corresponds to different strings, producing unique effects. Furthermore, Ivan realized that not all strings were created equal. Some strings are delicate, like silk or wool, while others are sturdy, like nylon or steel wire, or even iron rods. Yes, iron rods. Among the countless strings of the world, Ivan identified 12 that stood apart from the rest, unyielding, powerful, and almost immovable. Even with his current magic power of 6, Ivan found that striking these 12 strings required all his strength to elicit even the faintest vibration. If I were still at the level of an archmage, I doubt I could even budge these strings, let alone make them resonate. Intrigued yet cautious, Ivan refrained from recklessly experimenting with these 12 powerful strings. The one exception he made was the string of life, which he sensed was relatively gentle and less dangerous. The feedback from the string of life was extraordinary. When Ivan struck it, he felt a warm, vibrant energy flowing back into him, an overwhelming sensation of vitality and growth. Before he could fully process the experience, he noticed his surroundings begin to change. The lakes shimmered with renewed clarity, the forests flourished, and even the mountains he had collapsed earlier began to regenerate. Is this the realm of magic at level 6? Ivan was awestruck. The strings of the world weren't just tools for creating spells, they held the power to directly alter reality. True magic was no longer merely an act of force or manipulation. It had evolved into a power that could fundamentally transform the world itself. If Ivan were to use terms from the novels he had read in his previous life, the strings of the world could be equated to the laws of nature, fundamental truths that govern reality. Reaching Magic 6 granted him the ability to directly manipulate these laws through magic. The finer threads surrounding the string of life must represent more specific manifestations of the law of life, Ivan hypothesized. Testing his theory, he carefully manipulated one of the finer threads. The results confirmed his suspicions. Silk, thread, and string, 3 distinct tiers of the laws, arranged from subtle to profound. Each had its own unique resonance, and the sounds they produced directly influenced the material world. In essence, if Ivan could decipher the meaning of these threads and strings, he could cast spells with a level of precision and power previously unimaginable. Great magic. This was the term Ivan coined for the spells created using the strings of the world. Unlike conventional spells, great magic carried the weight of natural disasters. Ivan's earlier casual manipulation of the strings had caused mountains to collapse and rivers to alter course. The results were miracles on a scale far beyond anything ordinary wizards could achieve. And yet, this was far from Ivan's limit. If I truly unleashed my full strength, and was willing to pay the price, I could compose music using the 12 fundamental laws, akin to the pillars of existence. These 12 pillars were no ordinary concepts. Time, space, life, death, love, thought, celestial bodies, destiny. Each represented an essential force of the universe. If these principles could be transcribed into strings, forming individual notes in a grand symphony, the resulting magic would possess a level of power that could reshape reality itself. To describe such force as destructive would hardly do it justice. What incredible power, Ivan murmured, awestruck. He had never imagined that the magic system of the Harry Potter world could reach such heights. With this newfound mastery, Ivan realized that he could obliterate Voldemort, or even Dumbledore, instantaneously. Well, you can't think like that. Ivan found that his mentality at this moment was very similar to when he awakened the Obscurus. The Obscurus carried strong negative emotions, and although the world's strings did not have such side effects, the vague impulse in his heart was also difficult to suppress. How to say it, it's like the curiosity of a cat. The strings of the world also seemed to have an incomparable temptation, attracting Ivan to touch and pluck. Every thread, every string of the world, represents a meaning. What a wonderful music it will be when it is played. Especially the scene in reality represented by this music, whether it is destruction, rebirth, or creation. I can wield creation magic while truly exploring the song of the world itself. How wonderful would it be? And if it ended up destroying everything? Who really can point fingers at me? No one can stop me, right? Will Dumbledore reprimand me? Yes. But could he be able to do anything? No, right? Will Hermione hate me? Maybe. But with this kind of power, who the fuck cares what the lower life forms think? Countless strings of the world are right in front of me, waiting for my exploration. Slap. Huh. What the fuck is wrong with me? Ivan slapped himself hard and took several deep breaths, trying to suppress those dangerous thoughts. He knew that this might be the burden of awakening the strings of the world. Is this how normal wizards feel while using powerful dark magic? Ivan realized that just like how the dark wizards lose themselves in dark magic itself, he could lose himself in this new magic which seemed more powerful than any other magic known in the world. These strings of the world are not something that can be touched easily. Ivan kept reminding himself in his heart, the cost of trying is not something I can afford. The strings of the world are like blind boxes, they are big and small. Ivan knows that those big boxes contain very terrible power, he can take the initiative to avoid and not touch them. But what about the small boxes? They are countless, it is not an exaggeration to say that they are as numerous as stars. Especially when Ivan was about to try to pluck a lifeline near the string of life, the soul's warning began to sound without warning. The lifeline is not only about resuscitation and rebirth, it also represents the state of different lives and the changes of species. There is no doubt that once Ivan touches the lifeline of a species, the consequences will be disastrous. Changing the genes of a species and causing it to mutate is a small matter. What is more terrifying is breaking the taboo of life and creating a terrible monster. And I am not sure what these lifelines represent specifically. Will there be a lifeline of someone Ivan knows? Once he touches it, Hermione, Luna and the others might age and die in an instant. Ivan couldn't imagine such a thing at all. Therefore, before he could control this power, Ivan had to be extremely cautious and never use it with a playful attitude. As for how to solve it, is the soul attribute insufficient? Ivan was basically sure that there was a delicate balance between the soul, magic power, and physique. When the soul attribute reached 6, Ivan would know what each world string represented specifically. Then, he could rely on the thinking attribute to perform more accurate control. If the function of thinking 3 is analysis and calculation, then will it be control? Is there a way to make the world string produce the sound I want? Ivan thought it was very likely. Then what about the mind? What's the use of the mind? He mused. Music. After a moment, Ivan's thoughts became clearer. What is the most important thing about a song? He asked to himself. Emotion. The mind, Ivan realized, was the power of emotions. The process of casting spells as a wizard relied heavily on channeling one's emotions to influence and shape the rules of magic. In essence, rules and concepts had the capacity to resonate with and accept emotions. The observation from the soul, the strength drawn from magic, the precision provided by will, the analytical clarity from thinking. All of these combined to project the emotions the wizard's mind intended to express onto the world. This understanding, Ivan concluded, was the key to unlocking and navigating the full potential of magic level 6, almost. After confirming that his power was under control, Ivan finally felt at ease. It was time to leave. However, before departing, Ivan needed to calm the magical creatures that had been terrified by the commotion he had caused. The magnitude of the destruction had been far too great, leaving the creatures deeply unsettled. Thankfully, Ivan's unique ability to communicate with magical creatures proved invaluable. After some explanation and reassurance, the panic among them subsided. Furthermore, learning that the terrifying magic had been cast by Ivan himself, many magical creatures, including the majestic thunderbirds, grew more respectful toward him. Instinctively, they recognized Ivan as the dominant force in the region, a being at the pinnacle of the magical food chain. Even the fiercest of beasts submitted, behaving like timid house cats in his presence. Boom crackle foosh. Ivan waved his wand, casting spells to restore the damage caused by his earlier outburst. Using both the apparition spell to move quickly and a powerful reparo, he began repairing the devastated land. Mountains that had crumbled were returned to their original majesty, and the scars left on the earth were healed. This scale of restoration would have been unthinkable for Ivan before. While his magic was already powerful, the sheer scope of the damage, akin to a natural disaster such as a flood, tsunami, or hurricane, had previously been beyond the limits of his abilities. Such events were typically considered forces of nature, impossible to reverse through human effort. But now, things were different. With the magic power increased to LV6, Ivan not only awakened the power to pluck the strings of the world, but also made an unprecedented breakthrough in magic power. The same spell, the effect at magic power 5, and what Ivan can do now are like two completely different magics. Ivan steadied his breathing as he controlled a massive rock nearly 100 meters tall. Dust and gravel swirled in the air before slowly reversing, as though time itself had rewound. The fragments seamlessly reattached to the cliffside, leaving no visible gaps. He turned to gaze at the forest in the distance. It had been restored to its previous state, teeming with life, with no sign of the destruction that had just occurred. With this kind of power, in ancient times, even if someone called themselves a god, no one would doubt it, Ivan muttered to himself. He understood the origins of the so-called gods in Muggle myths. Many of their prototypes were wizards from the magical world. This was the prevailing belief within the wizarding community. At first, Ivan had subscribed to the same view. But now, as he wielded a power capable of both destroying and restoring nature effortlessly, he began to feel he might have underestimated those so-called gods. They were, indeed, wizards, not actual deities. However, Ivan now realized that the abilities attributed to gods, their supposed divine feats, could just as easily be performed, or even surpassed, by wizards at a certain level of magic power. But where did they go? Ivan wondered aloud. The breakthrough to magic power 6 had shown him the possibility of wizards transcending into something akin to divinity. Yet, this realization also brought a troubling question. Where had those ancient wizards who might have reached this level gone? Ivan had the system, a unique tool granting him access to this power, which made his situation exceptional. But the notion that no wizard throughout history had ever reached such a level seemed implausible to him. This world, Ivan muttered. His gaze fell upon the secret world he stood within. Previously, the origins of the secret world had been a mystery to him. But as his understanding of magic deepened with his newfound abilities, Ivan began to uncover hidden truths about its creation. The wizard who created this world must have mastered the power to pluck the strings of the world. Not only that, as Ivan carefully observed, he noticed that the rules governing the secret world were astonishingly stable. The sky, the earth, the natural ecology. If all of these were created from nothing, woven together using great magic. Ivan shook his head in disbelief. He couldn't begin to fathom the sheer power of a wizard capable of such a feat. That kind of creation was far beyond the reach of his current abilities, no matter how much progress he had made. If my attributes remain as they are now, Ivan calculated, it would take me at least 100 years of continuous improvement to even come close to the level of the creator of the secret world. What a massive gap, he muttered, the thought dampening his earlier excitement about his recent magical breakthrough. There's still a long way to go. Ivan took a deep breath, allowing the humbling realization to center him. With renewed focus, he carefully examined his surroundings one final time. After ensuring everything in the secret world was as it should be, he decided to leave. Exploring the depths of the secret world would take time, but Ivan was in no rush. In Ivan's dormitory, the two little witches had left, and only Neville was waiting for him. Is there something wrong? Huh? Ivan was a little surprised because Neville had not rested yet. After hearing his concerned inquiry, Ivan realized that his actions today had made his friends worried. I'm fine. I just made a small breakthrough in magic, Ivan said, using his thumb and index finger to gesture as if measuring a small amount. I'm sorry to worry you. Breakthrough. Him. Ivan didn't know how to explain further and simply said that he had grown stronger. Amazing, Ivan. You're making progress every day, as if there's no limit. Neville envied Ivan but also knew that no other wizard in the wizarding world possessed Ivan's level of talent. Where are Hermione and the others? They were waiting for you to come out, Neville said awkwardly, but Professor McGonagall came. After Ivan's training, Neville's social phobia had improved significantly, but his awkwardness in certain situations hadn't changed much. Is it that late already? Ivan glanced at the wall clock and realized it was well past lights out. Although the Gryffindor lounge included both boys and girls, there was still a clear distinction between the dormitories. Go to bed early, Ivan said, turning off the lights. Good night. Good night, Neville replied. Neville had been exhausted for a while, and the only reason he had stayed awake was his worry for Ivan. Now that Ivan was back and seemed fine, Neville felt entirely at ease. As soon as he lay down in his pajamas, Neville drifted off to sleep almost instantly. His ability to fall asleep so quickly never ceased to amaze Ivan. When Neville fell into a deep sleep, Ivan's consciousness naturally entered the dream dimension. Here, Ivan met with Luna and shared the fact that he had become stronger with this quirky girl. Magic's sudden breaking to LV6 not only gave Ivan great power, but also boosted his confidence. Apart from the myths and legends of ancient wizards, whose fates were unknown, Ivan had now become one of the most powerful wizards alive. With the magic power to pluck the strings of the world, Ivan was like a walking force of nature. Of course, he had no intention of becoming a degenerate edgy villain. Ivan still had 7 years at Hogwarts to grow and develop. Only 1 year had passed, and it was far too soon for him to step out of the shadows and reveal his true strength. In a few months, Luna, you'll be able to enter Hogwarts and become a first-year student, Ivan said, gently patting the girl's head. He smiled and asked, so, what's your favorite house? Ivan, look at this. The next morning, the young wizards were enjoying a sumptuous breakfast prepared by the house elves in the Great Hall. So many owls! Someone shouted, and everyone looked up to see countless owls carrying packages in their beaks or talons. The next moment, a large number of packages fell from the sky, landing in the hands of the young wizards. Look at this! Someone broke into Gringotts yesterday. Merlin. How did he do it? It seems that even the head of the Auror office was defeated by him. Not only that, it says the Ministry of Magic dispatched nearly 100 Aurors but still failed to catch the Dark Wizard. The Daily Prophet was almost entirely dedicated to the previous day's invasion of Gringotts, detailing the event as if the reporter had witnessed it firsthand. It's terrifying. That's Gringotts. Ron shivered. No one has ever stolen anything from there. Come on, you know who did it, Hermione said, reminding Ron of his selective memory lapse. She pointed out that Voldemort had manipulated Quirrell to sneak into Gringotts at the start of the school year. Now there's a second person who can do it. What's so surprising? Completely different, Penelope said. The senior student, who was sitting with them, clearly knew more about the wizarding world than the younger students. It says here that it was a frontal intrusion. Oh my, do you know what that means? What? He defeated all the guards in Gringotts by himself. Because of her familiarity with the wizarding world, Penelope naturally understood the structure of Gringotts and had a general idea of how powerful those hired wizards were. It was no exaggeration to say that, compared to those hired wizards, she herself wouldn't stand a chance in a fight. Penelope was exceptionally smart and one of the most talented and skilled witches in the school. When it came to spells, Penelope could rival those hired wizards and might even be better. However, in terms of practical combat experience, Penelope was a complete novice. To put it bluntly, the difference between academics and practitioners was like comparing most wizards who graduated from Hogwarts to battle-hardened hired wizards. Ivan, what do you think about this matter? Penelope turned to Ivan, curious to hear his opinion, but she noticed his unusually calm demeanor. What's going on? Not only Penelope, but Hermione also noticed it. They saw Ivan fold the newspaper calmly and hand it to Harry, Ron, and the others, who were eagerly clamoring to read it. Slurp. Ivan took a sip of milk, looking completely unbothered. For some reason, an absurd thought crossed the minds of both Hermione and Penelope. Could it be that Ivan already knew about this? But, why? How did Ivan know? Yesterday, at this time yesterday, Ivan had gone somewhere in. Suddenly, the two women looked at each other, and in that moment, they saw shock and disbelief reflected in each other's eyes. This person. The person who invaded Gringotts is Ivan. The realization hit them both simultaneously, and they almost instinctively covered their mouths to prevent themselves from exclaiming and inadvertently exposing Ivan's identity. No need to be that shocked, it's actually no big deal. Ivan didn't speak, but his voice rang in the minds of the two women. This is an alternative use of Legilimens, a wandless and spellless magic that only wizards like Ivan, whose soul attributes have reached 5 points, can do. Is it really you? Penelope exclaimed in her heart. She didn't know if Ivan could hear her, but she still asked, "How did you do it?" "It's not difficult, Senior," Ivan replied telepathically, with a slight smile. "Just as it's written in the paper. I walked in through the main gate, broke in, and then defeated the guards of Gringotts along with the Aurors who came to stop me. That must have been 200 people, right?" Hermione's shock was palpable, her mental voice trembling with disbelief. "You were alone. And you won?" The young witch knew Ivan was exceptionally powerful. She had witnessed him overpower Snape. Now that nearly a year has passed, his efforts must have improved a lot. However, facing the siege of nearly 200 adult wizards, he broke through the siege with his own strength. "Are you okay?" Penelope asked worriedly, and Hermione's heart rose to her throat at the senior's words. "Don't worry," Ivan replied, his tone calm and reassuring. "Their magic didn't even touch my clothes." To be honest, Ivan was far from impressed. "I was actually very disappointed," he admitted, not holding back from sharing the truth with the two women. He gestured as if mimicking someone casting spells. Most of the Aurors from the Ministry of Magic couldn't even properly use the shield charm. As for the wizards hired by Gringotts, they were more aggressive. They came at me with the killing curse right from the start. Hermione and Penelope both gasped slightly at this revelation. "At first, I was surprised too," Ivan continued, a hint of amusement in his voice, "but after fighting for a while, I realized they were just repeating the same handful of spells over and over." Ivan had discerned a clear difference between the two groups he faced. The Aurors had solid theoretical knowledge but lacked real combat experience. The hired wizards, on the other hand, were seasoned in battle, but their magic repertoire was limited. Of course, Ivan added, a few deadly spells are more than enough when the goal is to kill. The killing curse, for instance, is practically unstoppable. When you're aiming to take down an enemy, there's no need to rely on spells like disarming charms or stunning spells. He paused, his tone turning serious as he addressed the two witches. "In the future, if you encounter hired wizards, be cautious. They're incredibly aggressive." "This is too dangerous." Hermione's voice trembled with worry, her fear for Ivan evident. "You're taking too many risks. Please, don't ever do something like this again." For a good student like her, I can understand her saying that. Ivan remained silent for a moment, letting her concerns sink in. Then, as if she couldn't hold back any longer, Hermione blurted out, "Let us go with you." PFFT. Ivan literally choked on the milk. She knew her skills were no match for his and that she couldn't contribute in a direct fight. But there was no way to fight head-on. She could provide logistical assistance, such as helping Ivan conceal his tracks, falsely reporting an alibi, etc. For Ivan, Hermione's concern as his best friend meant more than any laws of the Ministry of Magic. Even Penelope seemed to have mentally prepared herself for whatever actions Ivan might take in the future. "I understand," Ivan said, acknowledging Hermione's sincerity. The little witch's concern for him was evident and heartfelt. "Next time, I'll make sure to inform you in advance." "And Senior," Ivan added, turning to Penelope. She responded, tilting her head slightly in curiosity. "Do you think my strength is sufficient?" One of Ivan's purposes in his recent action was to assess his combat effectiveness. And what he had demonstrated during the Gringotts intrusion was before his latest breakthrough in magic. If he had acted now, after the breakthrough, Ivan was confident he could unleash a powerful spell and raise Gringotts entirely, from top to bottom. It was this kind of devastating, natural disaster-like power that made Ivan fearless of the Ministry of Magic. If a conflict ever arose, he knew he had the capability to obliterate any opposition, no matter how many wizards stood in his way. Amazing. Can wizards be so powerful? Harry stared at the moving photos in the newspaper. The looping image showed the dark wizard, actually Ivan in disguise, casting the spell path of other fire god to instantly defeat all the hired wizards. The young wizards had never seen Path of Other Fire God before, nor did they fully understand its significance. But that didn't stop them from being awestruck. The battle at Gringotts seemed to have opened a door to a new understanding for the young wizards, making them realize that magic could reach such astonishing heights. Fighting against hundreds of opponents single-handedly and forcing back powerful wizards with a single spell, it was nothing short of legendary. So cool. The young wizards, especially those who had grown up in the wizarding world, were captivated. Led by Ronald, they expressed a mix of fear toward this wizard's immense power but even more admiration and envy. Ivan was not Voldemort. He didn't kill indiscriminately. Even that hired foreign wizard, whose arm Ivan had severed, recovered later under magical treatment. So, despite the newspapers claiming that Ivan was wreaking havoc everywhere, they also acknowledged that he hadn't caused any major harm. Beyond embarrassing the Ministry of Magic and calling Gringotts' security into question, there was little damage done. But who is he? On the Slytherin side, the younger students were more interested in Ivan's identity. How could such a powerful wizard have remained unknown until now? At that moment, Snape, clad in his usual black robes and resembling a large bat, hurriedly entered the Great Hall. His eyes locked onto Ivan, who was calmly eating his breakfast. "Ambrosius, come with me." Ivan looked up at Snape with a calm expression. After a brief moment, he stood up leisurely and followed him out of the hall. What happened? Ivan was called away by Professor Snape. Snape's arrival didn't cause much commotion. The little wizards were still engrossed in today's Daily Prophet, eager to learn what steps the Ministry of Magic would take next. Questions buzzed around the hall, whether Gringotts could still be trusted, and if their families would consider transferring their wealth elsewhere. What should we do? Hermione and Penelope, the only ones aware of the truth, were visibly uneasy. However, the fact that Snape had called Ivan away didn't necessarily mean his actions had been exposed. They knew Ivan's standing in Hogwarts. Occasionally, professors would consult Ivan for advice on certain matters, so none of the Otyher students linked the Gringotts intruder with Ivan. Meanwhile, Snape led Ivan into an empty, secluded classroom. With a wave of his wand, Snape cast a sealing charm on the room, ensuring no one could overhear or intrude upon their conversation. "Is this you?" Snape held up the Daily Prophet, pointing at the image of the dark wizard shrouded in white mist. "Isn't it obvious, Professor?" Ivan calmly found a seat and sat down, and this fearless look really made Snape's eyebrows jump wildly. "Does he know?" Snape's question referred to Dumbledore. Snape had mixed feelings about Ivan. On one hand, Ivan was a student at Hogwarts, and as a professor, Snape felt a certain responsibility to guide and protect him. But the issue lay in Ivan's unparalleled talent. In just 1 year, within a single month of enrollment, Ivan had surpassed Snape himself. "Are you insane?" Snape gritted his teeth and hissed, "Your magic with white steam is absolutely unique in the wizarding world? And Path of Other Fire God? I suspect there's nothing but troll feces in your brain. Don't you realize this is Dumbledore's exclusive magic? Couldn't you use any other spell?" At the end, Snape's frustration finally bubbled over, revealing his true concern. He didn't care about Ivan's conflicts with the Ministry of Magic, nor did he care about the goblins at Gringotts. As for the wizards hired by Gringotts, Snape regarded them as little more than international mercenaries. Since they dared to cast the killing curse on Ivan, they should have been prepared for the consequences of facing him. What truly worried Snape was Ivan's age, just 12 years old, and the possible psychological toll of having taken a life. However, according to the reports in the Daily Prophet, Ivan hadn't killed anyone at all. The most Ivan had done was cut off the hand of a hired wizard. What else was there to say? Thinking of Ivan's overwhelming strength that could dominate any battlefield, Snape wanted to sarcastically mutter, "Ivan, truly, you're beyond words. I could weep." Ivan had shown mercy and spared lives, yet people still questioned whether he had stepped into darkness. If Voldemort had Ivan's strength, sparing anyone, let alone showing mercy, would have been unthinkable. Forget mercy. Voldemort wouldn't have left a single soul alive in England. "Professor, are you worried about me? Isn't it obvious?" Snape's piercing glare fixed on Ivan. He wasn't the only one. Professor McGonagall and the other senior professors were concerned as well. It was well known among Hogwarts professors that Ivan's abilities were extraordinary. During past training sessions, a group of professors had once joined forces to test Ivan, leading to the discovery of his magic incarnation. When they read today's Daily Prophet, at least the head of the houses immediately recognized the figure in the report as none other than Ivan. Be honest. How do you plan to handle this situation? Snape knew Dumbledore had a soft spot for Ivan, but even Snape couldn't help feeling envious of the favoritism. Dumbledore. You old fool. Are you really just going to let Ivan do whatever he pleases, then clean up the mess for him? If that's not indulgence, I, Severus Snape, might as well drown myself in Potter's shampoo. Ha! Ivan sighed helplessly and said, "Do you know why Voldemort was able to run rampant in England?" Snape was momentarily stunned but quickly caught on to what Ivan was implying. There's no need to hide anything anymore. Ivan raised his finger and tapped lightly, and suddenly, the space within the entire classroom shattered like fragile glass under immense pressure. What is this? Before Snape could fully express his astonishment, Ivan moved his fingers again. The fragmented space, riddled with cracks, reverted to its original state as though time itself had reversed. It was as if nothing had happened at all. The magical display was beyond extraordinary, even for someone as well versed in magic as Snape. While Snape knew of spells capable of producing similar effects, the precision and ease with which Ivan executed the feat were unprecedented. The wizarding world is so big that there are too many things invented by people, such as time-turners, the Philosopher's Stone, and spells like the Extension Charm which dapples with local space compression and destruction as well as the 3 unforgivable curses. So creating something powerful is indeed difficult, but not impossible. But your magic just now. But the crux of the matter was not there. What did Snape just witness? A young wizard, who had only been at Hogwarts for less than a year, even as a natural-born great wizard, should not be capable of performing such magic with a simple wave of his hand. It was undeniable that this display shattered Snape's understanding of the capabilities of wizards. How did you do it? A whole new realm, Professor. With his newfound strength, Ivan spoke with confidence. A new realm? Snape frowned, clearly puzzled by Ivan's statement. Let me put it this way, Ivan began. Do you know about the concept of an archmage? Snape certainly did. Voldemort, Dumbledore, and the former Grindelwald, all of them were great wizards. Moody and Kingsley understood the distinction between great wizards and ordinary ones, but Snape, who had close interactions with both Voldemort and Dumbledore, knew even more. He was fully aware of the vast gap that separated them from ordinary wizards. I am a natural-born archmage, Professor. You should know that, right? Are you showing off to me? Ivan smiled. I suppose so, but isn't it simply the truth? Then, what is this new realm you're talking about? God. When Ivan spoke, Snape looked at him as though he had lost his mind. Well, of course, I mean the power of God, Ivan clarified, his tone calm. I call it greater magic. A new power that has undergone a qualitative change from ordinary magic. Ivan regarded Snape with optimism. He genuinely believed Snape had the potential to become a great wizard. Not just Snape, but also Professors McGonagall and Flitwick. Although the 2 deans were older, 70 years wasn't much for wizards. Wizards with powerful magic unconsciously conveyed their needs to magic as they aged, maintaining the vitality of their bodies. Take Dumbledore, for example. He was nearly 120 years old. Despite his white hair, his physical condition was still robust. While it would be an exaggeration to call him young, he could still hold his own against a middle-aged man in his 50s. For wizards, as long as they weren't killed or succumbed to a magical mishap, their natural lifespans easily exceeded 100 years. Snape, McGonagall, and Flitwick were all masters in their respective magical fields. They had no shortage of magical knowledge or experience. What they lacked was the courage to attempt a magic transformation ritual, and, perhaps most importantly, luck. The mortality rate of magic transformation was extraordinarily high. Any trace of fear in one's heart would lead to failure, almost without exception. But now, there was Ivan. Just as he could help Penelope and Hermione design magic transformation potions, he could also help the deans take that crucial step further. In front of the magic eye and a soul attribute of 5, luck is irrelevant. As long as Ivan desired, he could ensure the safety of magic transformation. Even in the case of failure, he could still protect them and avert any danger. After multiple magic transformations, a master of magic can break the shackles of life, let their magic power advance further, and thus become an archmage. And now, I am at the edge of the archmage's realm. For this new realm, Ivan could only describe it as mythical. The power to pluck the strings of the world felt scarcely different from the abilities attributed to legendary gods. Ivan didn't go into detail about the specific changes. It was impossible to explain. Without experiencing that reality firsthand, one couldn't comprehend how the strings of the world truly functioned. Magic is power. Professor, you asked me why I didn't disguise myself, Ivan said, his tone calm. But is it necessary? In all of England, there is no wizard more powerful than Professor Dumbledore. But why does the Ministry of Magic fear Voldemort but not him? Because the headmaster restrains himself and abides by the rules of the magical world, Ivan answered plainly. Voldemort is a complete disruptor. He disregards the rules of the magical world entirely. Not only does he kill wizards indiscriminately, but he also treats muggles as less than human, slaughtering them at will. And yet, even such a Voldemort has the support of many pure bloods. It can be seen from this that the laws of the Ministry of Magic are bullshit. The Ministry of Magic is no match for me alone. Professor, do you know what this means? Ivan said boldly, it means that if I wanted to, I could destroy the entire Ministry of Magic by myself. Hearing this, even Snape couldn't help but tremble inwardly before taking a deep breath. He had always known that the young wizard before him was not an ordinary student. Ivan might be even more terrifying than Voldemort. With greater talent, more powerful magic, and his ambitious thoughts, Ivan was a force that no one could ignore. As Ivan said, if he wished, the laws of the Ministry of Magic were utterly meaningless to him. Yes. Magic is power, Snape murmured to himself. He found no words to refute Ivan's claim. But, Professor, Ivan said, raising a finger with a smile, I am willing to abide by the rules of the game everyone has set. I want to be the second Dumbledore, not Voldemort. When a wizard with overwhelming power chooses not to wield violence and instead adheres to the established rules, what more could anyone demand of him? Would they really push such a being to the opposite side, forcing them to become an enemy? The old headmaster had already recognized this truth, which was why he was so reassured. In the wizarding world, there is a clear path to advancement. After graduating from a magical school, wizards either join various departments in the Ministry of Magic or become free wizards, quietly building their reputation. When the term of the current president of the International Confederation of Wizards ends, candidates can seek nominations from the Ministries of Magic in various countries. The nominated individuals then step onto the international stage to garner votes. With Ivan's talent, he didn't need to follow Voldemort's destructive path. What sense did it make to set oneself against countless wizards? I don't really understand Voldemort, Ivan said thoughtfully. With his abilities, he could have taken a much broader road, yet he chose the most extreme one. Perhaps, in the eyes of Voldemort, who had reached the level of an archmage, the bureaucrats of the Ministry of Magic weren't worth walking alongside. So, he decided to carve his path through sheer force. But that wasn't Ivan's style. Ivan preferred Dumbledore's way of handling things, albeit with less of the self-sacrificing, martyr approach. He would not cause destruction or kill indiscreetly, but he would also not be taken as a fool who only knows pacifism and will command authority and respect. I will continue to grow, and I will work hard to cultivate my own team, Ivan said confidently. Then, I'll gain the support of the Ministry of Magic. Ivan didn't desire the position of Minister of Magic himself. But there was someone close to him who was perfectly suited for it. Hermione. Under Ivan's control, of course. In the original timeline, Hermione had become the Minister of Magic. It was clear that she possessed the talent and determination needed to excel in such a role.